The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Ranch as Benjamin Walsh stepped onto his weathered front porch, steam rising from his coffee mug in the crisp dawn air. At 35, he had the kind of rugged appearance that came from years of honest work under the Texas sun, his dark hair showing the first hints of silver at the temples, and calloused hands that spoke of a man who knew the value of hard labor. The ranch had been his sanctuary for the past 8 years, ever since he'd walked away from his corporate job in Dallas and never looked back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence of his 100-acre spread was broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle creak of the old windmill that had been turning faithfully for 3 generations. Benjamin preferred it this way: predictable, quiet, ordered. His daily routine was as reliable as sunrise. Coffee on the porch at dawn, checking on the livestock, mending whatever needed fixing, and ending each day with the satisfaction of honest work completed. But this morning something was different. In the distance, where the dirt road curved around the old oak grove, a peculiar sight was making its way toward his property. Benjamin squinted, setting down his coffee cup and stepping closer to the porch railing. What appeared to be an old hay cart, the kind his grandfather might have used decades ago, was being pulled by a single weary-looking mule. The cart swayed and bumped along the rutted road, moving so slowly it seemed almost stationary against the vast landscape. As the strange procession drew nearer, Benjamin could make out more details. The hay cart was piled high with what looked like old quilts and blankets, creating makeshift bedding in the wagon bed. But it was what happened next that made him set down his coffee entirely and lean forward with growing concern. His prize rooster, Napoleon, a magnificent red bird with an attitude to match his name, came strutting around the corner of the barn just as the hay cart approached. The rooster took one look at the unusual sight and let out a shriek that could have woken the dead, his feathers standing on end as he flapped his wings in territorial outrage. The sound was so sudden and piercing that even Benjamin jumped. But what truly caught his attention was the reaction from the hay cart. 4 tiny heads popped up from beneath the quilts like prairie dogs, their hair tousled from sleep, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. Quadruplets. 4 children who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, all staring at the indignant rooster with expressions that ranged from fascination to concern. Before Benjamin could fully process what he was seeing, a woman's voice rose from the front of the cart, gentle but firm. "Shh, babies, it's just a rooster. Lie back down now." The voice carried a weariness that spoke of long miles traveled and burdens carried too long alone. Benjamin found himself walking toward the approaching cart without conscious decision, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. As he drew closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was probably in her early 30s, with auburn hair escaping from a simple braid, wearing clothes that had seen better days but were clean and carefully mended. Her face showed the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, but her posture remained straight with a dignity that circumstances hadn't managed to break. The mule came to a halt about 20 feet from Benjamin's porch, breathing heavily from the exertion of pulling its precious cargo. The woman climbed down from the driver's seat with movements that suggested every muscle ached, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the morning air, 2 strangers connected by an inexplicable moment of destiny. "I'm sorry to bother you so early," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor that spoke of nerves held tightly in check. "I was hoping, that is, I was told in town that you might." She paused, glancing back at the 4 small faces peering over the edge of the cart, and seemed to gather her courage. "I was told you sometimes hire seasonal help." Benjamin's eyes moved from her face to the children in the cart, taking in details that painted a picture he was beginning to understand. The quilts were worn but lovingly maintained. The children's clothes were patched but clean. The woman's hands showed the calluses of hard work, and her eyes held the kind of desperation that came from having exhausted all other options. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm Benjamin Walsh." "And you are?" "Sarah Chen," she replied, lifting her chin slightly as if preparing for rejection. "And these are my children, Emma, Grace, Hope, and Faith." Each name was spoken with such love and pride that Benjamin felt something shift in his chest. The quadruplets had settled back into their nest of quilts, but their eyes remained visible, 4 pairs of dark, intelligent gazes watching this tall stranger, who had the power to determine their immediate future. Benjamin noticed how they instinctively moved closer together, a protective unit forged by circumstances he couldn't yet imagine. "Mrs. Chen," Benjamin began, then paused when he saw her wince slightly. "Miss Chen," he corrected, noting the absence of a wedding ring and the relief that crossed her features at his consideration. "It's still early morning. When did you all last eat?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure wavered. The children had some crackers yesterday evening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin felt his heart clench. Whatever circumstances had brought this woman and 4 children to his doorstep in a haycart at dawn, hunger shouldn't be part of their immediate concern. "Well then," he said, his decision made before his mind could overthink it, "I reckon the first order of business is breakfast." Sarah's eyes widened, hope flickering across her features before caution reasserted itself. "Mr. Walsh, I don't want charity. I came here looking for work, not handouts." "And work we'll discuss," Benjamin assured her. "But right now, I've got 4 little ones who need feeding, and it's been too long since this kitchen has seen proper use anyway." He gestured toward his house, a sprawling ranch-style building that had clearly been built for a large family, though it had housed only him for years. The children had been listening to this exchange with the kind of intense attention that spoke of lives where adult conversations often determined their fate. Emma, who seemed to be the unofficial spokesperson among the quadruplets, whispered something to her sisters, and all 4 heads nodded in unison. "Mama," Grace said softly, her voice carrying the slight lisp of missing front teeth. "The man seems nice, and I'm really hungry." Sarah's resolve crumbled at her daughter's quiet admission. "We would be very grateful for breakfast, Mr. Walsh. And of course I'll work to pay for whatever you provide." "We'll sort all that out," Benjamin said, already moving toward the hay cart. "For now, let's get everyone inside where it's warm." As he approached the cart, Napoleon chose that moment to strut back into view, apparently having decided that the strangers were no immediate threat to his domain. The rooster eyed the proceedings with the imperious gaze of a feathered monarch surveying his subjects, then let out a more moderate crow that seemed almost welcoming. Hope, the most adventurous of the quadruplets, giggled at the sound. "He's pretty," she announced, pointing at Napoleon's magnificent tail feathers. "That's Napoleon," Benjamin said, surprised to find himself smiling. "He's the boss around here, or so he likes to think." "Like a king?" Faith asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Exactly like a king," Benjamin confirmed, and was rewarded with 4 beaming smiles that seemed to light up the morning air. Sarah began gathering the children from the cart, her movements gentle and efficient. Benjamin watched as she helped each girl down, noting how they stayed close to their mother's side, their small hands clutching at her worn skirt. Despite their obvious weariness and hunger, the children were well behaved, their quiet obedience speaking of a woman who had managed to maintain structure and love even in difficult circumstances. "Girls, stay close to Mama," Sarah instructed softly as they formed a small group beside the cart. The quadruplets arranged themselves in what was clearly a practiced formation, with Emma and Grace flanking their mother on one side, while Hope and Faith took position on the other. Benjamin found himself impressed by their quiet discipline. In his limited experience with children, he had expected more chaos, more noise. These 4 moved with the kind of careful consideration that suggested they had learned early that good behavior was essential to their family's survival. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The house is just up here," he said, leading the way toward his front porch. "It's not fancy, but it's warm, and the kitchen is well stocked." As they walked, Benjamin's mind raced with questions he was too polite to ask. How had a woman with 4 young children ended up traveling alone in a haycart? Where had they come from? And what circumstances had driven them to seek work at a remote ranch? Most puzzling of all, why did something about Sarah Chen seem familiar, as if he should remember her from somewhere? The porch steps creaked under their collective weight as Benjamin held the front door open, ushering his unexpected guests into his home. The entryway opened directly into a large living room that flowed into an equally spacious kitchen, all designed with the open floor plan that had been popular when his grandparents built the house. The quadruplets stopped just inside the doorway, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. The house was clean, but clearly bachelor territory, with practical furniture and minimal decoration. What drew their attention immediately were the large windows that looked out over the ranch, offering views of rolling pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the morning sun. "It's so big," Emma whispered, her voice filled with awe. "And clean," Grace added, as if this were not something they had encountered recently. Sarah placed gentle hands on her daughter's shoulders. "Remember your manners, girls. We're guests here." "They're fine," Benjamin assured her, genuinely touched by the children's obvious wonder at his simple home. "Please, make yourselves comfortable while I get breakfast started." He moved toward the kitchen, but found himself glancing back frequently as the family settled tentatively on his sofa. The quadruplets sat in a neat row, their small feet not quite reaching the floor, while Sarah perched on the edge of the cushion as if ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated details that Benjamin hadn't noticed in the dim dawn outside. Sarah's hair, now that he could see it clearly, was a rich chestnut brown with natural auburn highlights that caught the sun. Her face, despite its weariness, had delicate features and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The quadruplets, while clearly sisters, each had their own distinct personality already showing through their careful reserve. Emma, the apparent leader, kept a protective eye on her siblings while simultaneously cataloging every detail of their new environment. Grace seemed the most nervous, staying pressed close to her mother's side with one small hand twisted in Sarah's skirt. Hope lived up to her name with an optimistic curiosity that had her head turning to take in every sight, while Faith appeared to be the dreamer, her gaze fixed on the pastoral scene visible through the windows. "Coffee?" Benjamin asked Sarah as he began pulling ingredients from his well-stocked pantry. "Please," she said gratefully. "It's been a while." He set the coffee to brewing and began assembling the components for what his grandmother had always called a proper breakfast. Eggs from his own chickens, bacon from a pig he'd raised himself, fresh bread from the bakery in town that he visited weekly, and potatoes from his garden. Simple ingredients, but combined with care, they would make a meal that could restore both body and spirit. As he worked, Benjamin found himself stealing glances at his guests. The children were whispering among themselves in the way that siblings develop, their own private language of looks and gestures. Sarah sat quietly, but he could see her taking in every detail of his home, perhaps assessing whether this stranger posed any threat to her daughters. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked gently, not wanting to pry but hoping to understand their situation better. Sarah was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. 3 weeks. We started in Oklahoma. 3 weeks in a hay cart with 4 5-year-olds. Benjamin's respect for this woman's strength and determination grew exponentially. He wanted to ask what had driven them from Oklahoma, what circumstances had made such a journey necessary, but something in her posture told him those questions would have to wait. "Oklahoma's a long way," he said instead, cracking eggs into a bowl. "You've come through some beautiful country." The girls enjoyed seeing new places, Sarah said, and he could hear the love in her voice as she glanced at her daughters. "We've made it into an adventure." An adventure. Benjamin admired her ability to frame what must have been a desperate flight as something positive for her children. The quadruplets indeed seemed remarkably well-adjusted considering their circumstances, their quiet behavior. Speaking of a mother who had somehow maintained their sense of security, even while their world shifted around them. The smell of bacon began to fill the kitchen, and Benjamin noticed the children's noses twitching appreciatively. When had they last smelled fresh bacon cooking? When had they last had a hot meal prepared with care and plenty? "Mr. Walsh," Sarah said hesitantly, "I should explain why we're here. In town yesterday, someone mentioned that you sometimes hire help during busy seasons. I can cook, clean, help with paperwork, whatever you need. I'm not afraid of hard work." Benjamin turned from the stove to study her face. There was pride there, and determination, but also a vulnerability that she was trying hard to hide. This was a woman who had been pushed to her limits but refused to break. "What kind of work did you do in Oklahoma?" he asked. "I managed the office for a small construction company," she replied. "Bookkeeping, scheduling, customer relations. Before that, I taught elementary school for several years." A teacher. That explained the quiet authority she had with the children, the way she could manage 4 energetic 5-year-olds with gentle firmness. It also raised more questions about what had driven her from a profession she clearly loved to this desperate journey. "The ranch does need help," Benjamin said carefully, "especially with spring calving season coming up. But traveling with 4 children..." He paused, not wanting to suggest they were a burden, but needing to understand the practicalities. "The girls are very good," Sarah said quickly. "They won't interfere with work. They can entertain themselves, and they're used to being quiet when adults are busy." As if to prove her point, the quadruplets sat in perfect silence, watching the conversation with alert eyes, but making no demands for attention. It struck Benjamin as both impressive and heartbreaking that such young children had learned to be so unobtrusive. The coffee finished brewing, and he poured Sarah a cup, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. When had she last had a moment to rest, to let someone else take care of things even briefly? "Girls," he said, turning to the quadruplets, "are you old enough to help set the table?" 4 heads nodded eagerly, and suddenly the quiet children transformed into a coordinated team. Emma appointed herself supervisor, directing her sisters to specific tasks, while Sarah watched with obvious pride. Grace carefully carried napkins to the large dining table, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Hope and Faith worked together to distribute plates, their movements surprisingly graceful for children their age. "They're remarkable," Benjamin told Sarah quietly, as the girls busied themselves with their assigned tasks. "They've had to grow up quickly," she replied, sadness flickering across her features. "But they're still children. They still believe in magic and happy endings." The wistfulness in her voice suggested that Sarah herself had given up on happy endings, that her focus was now entirely on survival and providing for her daughters. Benjamin found himself wanting to restore some of that lost hope, though he wasn't sure why this family of strangers had affected him so powerfully. Breakfast came together quickly with the children's help, and soon the dining table was laden with more food than the 5 of them could possibly eat. Benjamin had deliberately prepared extra, suspecting that these guests might benefit from knowing that abundance was available, that they could eat their fill without worry. "This looks wonderful," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion as she surveyed the feast. "Girls, what do we say to Mr. Walsh?" "Thank you," came the chorus of small voices, and Benjamin felt his heart squeeze at their genuine gratitude for what he considered a simple meal. They settled around the table, and Benjamin found himself in the unfamiliar position of hosting a family breakfast. The quadruplets ate with the focused intensity of children who had experienced real hunger, while Sarah tried to maintain proper manners despite her obvious need. "Tell me about yourselves," Benjamin said, wanting to keep the conversation light while they ate. "What grade will you be in when school starts?" "Kindergarten," Emma announced proudly. "We already know how to read some words." "Mama taught us," Grace added, smiling at her mother with pure adoration. "She's the best teacher ever," Hope chimed in, while Faith nodded vigorously in agreement. Benjamin looked at Sarah with new understanding. Not only had she managed to care for quadruplets as a single mother, but she had also maintained their education despite whatever circumstances had driven them from their home. "That's impressive," he said genuinely. "Reading before kindergarten puts you ahead of most children your age." The praise brought bright smiles to all 4 faces, and for the first time since their arrival, the quadruplets began to relax slightly. Hope began telling him about a story their mother had read them about horses, while Faith described the different animals they had seen during their journey. As the meal progressed, Benjamin found himself genuinely enjoying the company. The house felt different, with voices and laughter filling the spaces that had been silent for so long. The quadruplets' personalities began to emerge more clearly as they grew comfortable. Emma was indeed the natural leader, organizing her sisters and keeping track of everyone's needs. Grace was the gentle soul, quick to offer comfort or help to anyone who needed it. Hope was the adventurer, full of questions and eager to explore. Faith was the dreamer, already making up stories about the ranch and its animals. And Sarah. Sarah was beginning to show glimpses of the woman she must have been before whatever crisis had driven her to his doorstep. Her smiles came more easily as she watched her daughters enjoying themselves, and her conversation revealed intelligence, humor, and strength. "Mr. Walsh," Emma said seriously as she finished her second helping of eggs. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," he confirmed, amused by her direct approach. "That must be lonely," Grace observed with the profound empathy that some children possess. "Sometimes it is," Benjamin admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "We could keep you company," Hope offered generously. "We're very good at company." "I can see that," Benjamin said, smiling at her earnest expression. Faith, who had been quietly studying him throughout the meal, suddenly spoke up. "You have kind eyes," she announced. "Like the man in Mama's favorite story who helps the lost princess find her way home." The comment hung in the air for a moment, loaded with more meaning than a 5-year-old could have intended. Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly, and she gently redirected her daughter's attention to finishing her breakfast. But Benjamin found himself moved by the child's innocent observation. When had anyone last seen kindness in his eyes? When had he last felt the warmth that came from helping others, from being needed for something more than just his ability to manage a ranch? After breakfast, as Sarah helped clear the table despite his protests, Benjamin found himself facing a decision he hadn't expected to make when he woke up that morning. His ranch did need help, especially with calving season approaching. He had been dreading the prospect of hiring temporary workers, dealing with strangers who might not care for his property the way he did. But this was different. Sarah had proven she was hard-working, intelligent, and capable. The children were well-behaved and adaptable. And something deeper was at work here, something that made him want to extend his hand to this family in need. "Sarah," he said as she rinsed dishes at his sink, the quadruplets having migrated to the living room windows to watch Napoleon strut around the yard. "I meant what I said about needing help. If you're serious about wanting work, I can offer you a position here." She turned to face him, hope and caution warring in her expression. "What kind of position?" "Ranch management assistance," he said, the idea forming as he spoke. "Someone to help with the business side, scheduling, supplies, that sort of thing. The pay would include room and board for all of you, plus a salary." "Room and board?" she repeated carefully. Benjamin nodded toward a hallway that led to the eastern wing of the house. This place was built for a large family. There are 4 bedrooms in that section that haven't been used in years. Each girl could have her own room, and you'd have the master suite. It has its own bathroom and sitting area. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she was trying hard not to shed. "Mr. Walsh, that's incredibly generous. But I need you to understand our situation. We don't have references, we don't have anywhere to go if this doesn't work out, and I can't promise how long we'd be able to stay." "References," Benjamin said dismissively, "are just other people's opinions. I can see for myself that you're a good mother, a hard worker, and someone I'd trust in my home. As for how long you stay, that depends on how well we all get along." He paused, studying her face, seeing the walls she had built to protect herself and her children from further disappointment. "Sarah, I'm not offering this out of pity. This ranch needs what you can provide, and frankly, I think I do too. It's been too quiet here for too long." From the living room came the sound of quiet giggles as the quadruplets apparently found something amusing about Napoleon's latest performance. The sound was like music in a house that had been silent for years. "There's one condition," Benjamin added, and he saw Sarah's shoulders tense, preparing for the catch she had been expecting. "If you wake the children gently each morning, Napoleon and I will make sure you all feel welcome here for as long as you want to stay." The tears Sarah had been holding back finally spilled over, and she turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Benjamin stepped closer, not quite touching, but offering his presence as comfort. "It's been so hard," she whispered, "trying to keep them safe, trying to stay strong, trying to find a place where we belong." "You belong here," Benjamin said softly, and was surprised to realize he meant it completely. "For as long as you want." Sarah wiped her eyes and turned back to face him, her expression showing a mix of gratitude, relief, and lingering disbelief. "Are you sure about this?" "Really sure?" Because if you change your mind—" "I won't change my mind," Benjamin assured her, "unless you give me reason to, which I don't expect you will." A crash of thunder outside reminded them that storm clouds had been building during their conversation. Through the windows they could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising the kind of spring storm that could last for hours. "Perfect timing," Benjamin observed. "You'll want to get settled before that hits." He led them to the eastern wing of the house, opening doors to rooms that had been closed for years. Each bedroom was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking different aspects of the ranch. The master suite was particularly impressive, with a sitting area that opened onto a private porch and views of the horse pastures. The quadruplets ran from room to room, their excited voices echoing through the previously silent halls. For the first time since their arrival, they acted like the children they were, their careful reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "This one has a window seat," Grace called out from one of the bedrooms. "And this one has built-in bookshelves," Emma added from another. "Can we really pick whichever room we want?" Hope asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Any room you like," Benjamin confirmed, delighted by their joy. Faith had claimed the room with the window seat, pressing her face against the glass to watch the approaching storm. "The clouds look like horses running," she announced dreamily. Sarah stood in the doorway of the master suite, taking in the comfortable furniture, the private bathroom, the small sitting area that would give her a space of her own. "Mr. Walsh, Benjamin, I don't know how to thank you." "You can thank me by making this place feel like a home again," he said simply. "It's been a house for too long." The first drops of rain began spattering against the windows as they made their way back to the main part of the house. Sarah went to retrieve a few essential items from the hay cart, Benjamin insisting on helping despite the increasing wind. "This is everything?" he asked, looking at the single worn suitcase and small bag that contained all their worldly possessions. "We had to travel light," Sarah explained, her voice tight with old pain. Benjamin decided not to press for details, at least not yet. Whatever had driven this family from their previous life, they were safe now. The rest could wait. Inside, as the storm began in earnest, the quadruplets had gathered in the living room, watching lightning flash across the sky with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sarah distributed a few small toys and books from their bag, simple pleasures that the children received like precious treasures. "Will the animals be okay in the storm?" Emma asked, pressing close to the window. "They'll be fine," Benjamin assured her. "The cattle know to find shelter, and the horses have a warm barn. They're probably more comfortable than we are." "What about Napoleon?" Faith asked with concern. "He's got his own little house behind the barn," Benjamin explained. "Probably settling in for a nap about now." The wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending sheets of rain across the landscape. But inside, the house felt warm and secure, filled with voices and presence in a way it hadn't been for years. Benjamin found himself watching Sarah as she settled her daughters for what might be their first restful afternoon in weeks. She moved with quiet efficiency, tucking blankets around each child, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads, creating a sense of security and love that no storm could touch. This was what the house had been missing, he realized. Not just occupants, but a family. People who cared for each other, who brought life and warmth to empty spaces. He had convinced himself that he preferred solitude. But watching Sarah with her daughters, he understood that he had simply been protecting himself from the possibility of loss. As the storm settled in for what promised to be a long afternoon of rain and wind, Benjamin made coffee for himself and Sarah, while the quadruplets curled up with their books in the living room. The house felt different already, filled with purpose and meaning in a way that had nothing to do with its physical structure. "They're wonderful girls," he told Sarah as they settled at the kitchen table with their coffee. "They're my everything," she replied simply. "Every decision I make, everything I do, it's all for them." "It shows," Benjamin said. "They're lucky to have you." Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee cup. "Sometimes I wonder if they wouldn't be better off with someone who could give them more. A real home, stability, opportunities I can't provide." "Sarah," Benjamin said gently, "they have the most important thing any child can have. They have a mother who loves them completely. Everything else is just details." She looked up at him with eyes that held too much sorrow for someone so young. "I hope you're right." Thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain settled into the steady rhythm of a storm that planned to stay a while. In the living room, the quadruplets had arranged themselves into a cozy reading circle, taking turns with the few books they possessed, their quiet voices creating a comfortable background murmur. Benjamin found himself thinking about the morning's events, how dramatically his quiet life had changed in just a few hours. This morning he had been a man alone, set in his ways, convinced that solitude was preferable to the complications that came with caring about others. Now his house was full of voices. His table had been graced by a family meal, and his future had suddenly become uncertain in the most hopeful way possible. "Benjamin," Sarah said quietly, "I need you to know that we won't be any trouble. The girls understand about being quiet and staying out of the way. If you need space, or if this becomes too much—" "Sarah," he interrupted gently, "I asked you to stay. I want you to stay. All of you. This house has been waiting for a family to fill it properly." Through the window, lightning illuminated the landscape in stark black and white, highlighting the cattle huddled under trees and the rain streaming down in torrents. But inside, warmth and security prevailed, created not by walls and roof, but by the simple presence of people who cared about each other. As the afternoon wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, Benjamin began to understand that this day marked more than just the arrival of temporary help for his ranch. It marked the beginning of something he hadn't dared hope for, the transformation of his house into a home, his solitary existence into something richer and more meaningful. The quadruplets had fallen asleep in their pile of blankets, exhausted by travel and the emotional stress of their uncertain situation. Sarah watched them with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had fought hard to keep her children safe, and Benjamin watched Sarah, marveling at the strength and grace she displayed despite circumstances that would have broken many people. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Riverside Ranch, a new chapter was beginning. A chapter that would challenge everything Benjamin thought he knew about happiness, family, and the courage it took to open your heart to possibilities you never saw coming. 2 weeks had transformed Riverside Ranch in ways Benjamin never could have anticipated. The morning silence he had once treasured was now replaced by the gentle sounds of a household coming to life. The soft padding of small feet on hardwood floors, the whispered conversations between sisters sharing secrets, and Sarah's melodic voice guiding her daughters through their morning routine. Benjamin stood at his bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the pastures in shades of gold and amber, listening to the familiar yet wonderfully foreign sounds of family life filtering through his home. The quadruplets had settled into their rooms with remarkable adaptability, each space now reflecting its young occupant's personality. Emma's room was organized with military precision, her few belongings arranged with careful attention to order. Grace had transformed her space into a cozy reading nook, using pillows and blankets to create intimate corners perfect for quiet contemplation. Hope's room buzzed with creative energy, her drawings and collections of interesting rocks and feathers displayed on every available surface. Faith's room had become a dreamer's paradise, with her bed positioned perfectly to watch the clouds drift across the sky through her window. The transformation extended beyond just the bedrooms. The entire house seemed to breathe differently now, filled with purpose and warmth that had been absent for far too long. Sarah had proven herself invaluable in managing the ranch's business affairs, bringing order to years of haphazard record-keeping and discovering inefficiencies that had been costing Benjamin significant money. Her background in office management shone through in everything she touched, from reorganizing his filing system to negotiating better rates with suppliers. But it was the smaller changes that affected Benjamin most profoundly. The kitchen table, once a solitary space where he ate hurried meals while reviewing livestock reports, had become the heart of their daily rhythm. Breakfast was no longer a quick refueling stop, but a time for planning the day, sharing stories, and enjoying the simple pleasure of conversation. The living room, previously used only for the occasional evening of reading ranch journals, now hosted elaborate tea parties with stuffed animals, homework sessions supervised by Sarah, and evening story time that had somehow begun including Benjamin as a regular participant. The quadruplets had embraced ranch life with enthusiasm that both surprised and delighted him. Emma had appointed herself assistant ranch manager, following Benjamin on his morning rounds with a small notebook where she recorded observations about the cattle's behavior and the condition of fencing. Her attention to detail rivaled that of seasoned ranch hands, and her questions demonstrated a natural understanding of animal husbandry that impressed Benjamin daily. Grace had formed an unexpected bond with the gentler ranch animals, spending hours in the pasture with the older cattle who seemed to sense her peaceful nature. She had a gift for remaining perfectly still, allowing even the most skittish animals to approach her with curiosity rather than fear. Benjamin often found her sitting cross-legged in the grass, surrounded by calves who treated her as part of their herd. Hope lived up to her adventurous spirit by exploring every corner of the ranch, always with Benjamin's permission, and usually with one of her sisters as backup. She had discovered hidden springs, ancient Native American artifacts, and the best spots for finding unusual rocks and fossils. Her boundless energy and fearless curiosity reminded Benjamin of his own childhood on the ranch, when every day had held the promise of new discoveries. Faith spent most of her time in the stable, having formed an immediate and profound connection with the horses. She possessed an intuitive understanding of their moods and needs that amazed Benjamin, who had been working with horses for decades. The animals responded to her presence with unusual calm, and even his most temperamental stallion, Thunder, would gentle at her approach. Napoleon the Rooster had become an unexpected source of entertainment for the girls. The proud bird seemed to revel in their attention, strutting and preening whenever they gathered to watch his morning patrol of the barnyard. Hope had taken to bringing him special treats, while Faith created elaborate stories about his adventures as the guardian of the ranch. Emma studied his behavior patterns with scientific precision, and Grace simply enjoyed his magnificent appearance, often spending quiet moments watching him with the same peaceful attention she gave to everything else. Sarah had blossomed in ways that took Benjamin's breath away. The desperate, exhausted woman who had arrived in the hay cart was revealing herself to be intelligent, capable, and possessed of a quiet strength that commanded respect. Her work with the ranch's business affairs had already resulted in improved efficiency and increased profitability, but more than that, she brought a perspective and attention to detail that Benjamin had never known he was missing. Their working relationship had developed into something comfortable and productive. Sarah handled correspondence with buyers, managed supply orders, and maintained detailed records of everything from feed costs to breeding schedules. Benjamin focused on the physical aspects of ranch management, but found himself seeking her input on decisions both large and small. Her insights were invariably helpful, her questions thoughtful, and her suggestions practical. But it was during the quiet evening hours that Benjamin found himself most affected by Sarah's presence. After the quadruplets were settled for the night, they often found themselves on the front porch, sharing coffee and conversation as the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. These conversations revealed depths to Sarah that her circumstances had forced her to hide. Her love of literature, her dreams of travel, her philosophical thoughts about life and family and the meaning of home. It was during one such evening, 3 weeks after their arrival, that the comfortable routine they had established was suddenly disrupted. Benjamin was in the barn, checking on a mare who was close to foaling, when he heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the ranch. Through the barn door, he could see a convoy of official-looking cars making their way up the drive, their purposeful approach immediately setting his nerves on edge. Sarah appeared at the barn entrance, her face pale with worry. "Benjamin, there are people here. They say they're from Child Protective Services and they want to speak with me about the girls." Benjamin felt his stomach drop. In the weeks since Sarah and the quadruplets had arrived, he had pushed aside his curiosity about what had driven them from Oklahoma, choosing instead to focus on the present and the obvious fact that they were a loving, healthy family. But now it seemed that whatever they had been running from had finally caught up with them. "Where are the girls?" he asked, moving quickly toward the house. "In their rooms, working on a puzzle Emma brought down from the attic," Sarah replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Benjamin, I need you to know that whatever they tell you, whatever accusations they make, I never hurt my children. I would die before I let anyone harm them." "I know that," Benjamin said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever this is about, we'll handle it together." The lead investigator was a stern-faced woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Margaret Foster from the Oklahoma Department of Human Services. She was accompanied by 2 other officials and a man in an expensive suit who had the unmistakable bearing of a lawyer. "Ms. Chen," Margaret Foster began, her tone professionally neutral but clearly skeptical. "We've had reports that you removed 4 minor children from the state of Oklahoma without proper notification to the court system. We're here to investigate the welfare of Emma, Grace, Hope, and Faith Chen, and to determine whether they are in a safe and appropriate environment. Sarah's composure was admirable, but Benjamin could see the fear in her eyes as she invited the officials into the living room. "The children are perfectly safe and well cared for," she said calmly. "I don't understand why there would be any concerns about their welfare." The lawyer stepped forward, his expression coldly professional. "Miss Chen, I represent the interests of Marcus Chen, who has filed for emergency custody of his deceased brother's children. Mr. Chen has expressed serious concerns about your stability and your ability to provide appropriate care for 4 children." Benjamin felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. Marcus Chen, presumably the brother of Sarah's deceased husband. But why would he be seeking custody of children who weren't biologically his? And what had driven Sarah to flee Oklahoma so suddenly? "Marcus has no legal standing to seek custody of my children," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite the obvious stress of the situation. "He never showed any interest in them while their father was alive, and he has no biological relationship to them." "Actually," the lawyer replied smoothly, "under Oklahoma law, Mr. Chen does have standing as the children's uncle and potential guardian, especially given the concerns that have been raised about your recent behavior and living situation." Margaret Foster opened a thick file folder and began reading from it in a voice devoid of emotion. "According to the reports we've received, Miss Chen, you suddenly quit your job, abandoned your residence, and disappeared with 4 minor children, without leaving any forwarding address or means of contact. You've been living as transients, moving from place to place without stable housing, education, or medical care for the children." "That's not true," Sarah protested, but her voice had lost its earlier strength. "I made the best decisions I could, under difficult circumstances. The children have never lacked for care or attention. Living in a hay cart for weeks, traveling across state lines with no fixed destination, accepting charity from strangers. These are not the actions of a responsible parent," the lawyer added with obvious satisfaction. Benjamin felt anger building in his chest. These people were painting Sarah as an unfit mother, based on circumstances they clearly didn't understand, reducing her strength and resourcefulness to evidence of instability. "Ms. Foster," he interjected, "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. Sarah Chen is employed by this ranch in a management capacity. She and her daughters have permanent housing here, and the children are receiving excellent care and education." Margaret Foster turned her attention to Benjamin for the first time, her expression skeptical. "And you are?" "Benjamin Walsh, owner of Riverside Ranch. Sarah is my ranch business manager, and her daughters are residents here." "How long have you known Miss Chen and her children?" the investigator asked, making notes in her file. Benjamin hesitated, realizing how their short acquaintance might appear to these officials. "They've been living here for 3 weeks." The lawyer pounced on this admission immediately. "So you took in a complete stranger and 4 children with no background check, no references, no verification of their identities or circumstances? That hardly suggests a responsible living arrangement." "I took in a family in need," Benjamin replied firmly. "Sarah has proven herself to be capable, responsible, and devoted to her children's welfare. Anyone spending 5 minutes with this family would see that." Margaret Foster was clearly unimpressed by his defense. "Mr. Walsh, we appreciate your willingness to help, but our concern is for the welfare of these children. We need to interview them individually to assess their current situation and determine whether they are receiving appropriate care." Sarah's control finally cracked. "Please," she said, tears beginning to flow despite her efforts to remain composed. "Don't frighten them. They've been through so much already. They're happy here, they're safe, they're thriving. Whatever Marcus has told you, whatever picture he's painted, it's not the truth." "Then perhaps you'd like to tell us your version of the truth," Margaret Foster said, settling back in her chair with the air of someone prepared for a long and unpleasant conversation. Sarah glanced at Benjamin, and he saw in her eyes both gratitude for his support and resignation to a battle she wasn't sure she could win. "My husband died 8 months ago in a construction accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wasn't the girls' biological father, but he adopted them when they were babies and loved them as his own." This revelation hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Sarah's children weren't biologically related to her deceased husband, which meant their Uncle Marcus had no blood relationship to them at all. Yet he was seeking custody based on his status as their legal father's brother. After David died, Sarah continued, Marcus began pressuring me to let him take the girls. He said I couldn't handle 4 children alone, that I didn't have the resources to provide for them properly. When I refused, he became increasingly aggressive. He started questioning my parenting decisions, criticizing my lifestyle, making threats about taking legal action. The lawyer interrupted. Mr. Chen was expressing legitimate concerns about the welfare of his deceased brother's children. When you suddenly disappeared with them, those concerns were validated. I didn't disappear, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with anger. I relocated to find better opportunities. There's nothing illegal about moving to another state with your own children. Margaret Foster looked up from her notes. Miss Chen, our records indicate that you were behind on rent payments, that you quit your job without notice, and that you left debts unpaid when you departed Oklahoma. These are not the actions of someone making responsible choices for their children's welfare. Benjamin watched Sarah's face crumble as the investigators systematically demolished her reputation and her motives. He could see that there was more to the story, layers of complexity and pain that these officials had no interest in understanding. But he could also see that in their narrow view of child welfare, Sarah's desperate flight looked exactly like the irresponsible behavior of an unfit parent. I'd like to speak with the children now, Margaret Foster announced, closing her file with an air of finality, individually and without their mother present. No, Sarah said immediately, maternal instinct overriding any desire to cooperate. They don't understand what's happening. They'll be frightened. Miss Chen, you can either allow us to interview the children here in familiar surroundings, or we can arrange for them to be brought to our offices for evaluation. The choice is yours. The threat was clear, and Sarah visibly wilted under its weight. Benjamin stepped forward, his own protective instincts fully engaged. The children can be interviewed here, but I want to be present during the conversations. That's not standard protocol, the lawyer objected. It's my house, Benjamin replied firmly, and those children trust me. If you want their cooperation, I'd suggest you accept my conditions. Margaret Foster studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Very well. We'll interview the children here, with you present, but Ms. Chen must remain out of sight during the conversations. Sarah looked at Benjamin with eyes full of gratitude and terror. He nodded reassuringly, hoping he projected more confidence than he felt. Whatever these officials were planning, whatever Marcus Chen's real motives were, Benjamin was determined not to let this family be destroyed by bureaucratic procedures and legal maneuvering. The interviews began with Emma, who handled the questions with the same serious attention she gave to everything else. Margaret Foster asked about their living conditions, their daily routine, their relationship with their mother. Emma answered honestly, but carefully, her natural protectiveness of her family evident in every response. Do you like living here on the ranch? Margaret Foster asked. Yes, ma'am, Emma replied politely. It's the nicest place we've ever lived. Mr. Walsh teaches us about animals and lets us help with ranch work. Mama is happy here. Are you getting proper education? Mama teaches us every day. We're reading at 2nd grade level already, and we know arithmetic and science. Mr. Walsh teaches us practical things too, like animal care and weather patterns. Benjamin felt pride swell in his chest at Emma's articulate responses. These children were clearly intelligent, well cared for, and thriving in their current environment. Grace's interview was more challenging, as her gentle nature made her uncomfortable with the stranger's intense questioning. But even through her nervousness, her love for her mother and her contentment with their current life shone through. Hope's natural exuberance made her the most forthcoming of the 4 girls. She enthusiastically described their daily adventures, the animals she had befriended, and the treasures she had discovered exploring the ranch. Her joy and energy were infectious, making it impossible to view her as anything other than a happy, healthy child. Faith's interview was perhaps the most revealing. Her dreamy nature and intuitive wisdom led her to observations that clearly surprised the investigators. Are you happy living here, Faith? Margaret Foster asked. Yes, ma'am. This is where we belong. I knew it the first day, when Napoleon the rooster welcomed us. Animals always know about people's hearts, and Napoleon knew we had good hearts. What about your mother? Is she happy here? Faith considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Mama was scared for a long time. She used to cry at night when she thought we were sleeping. But she doesn't cry anymore. She smiles now, real smiles, not the pretend ones she used to make so we wouldn't worry. Benjamin felt his heart clench at this revelation of Sarah's hidden struggles. The strength she had shown, the competence she had displayed, had been achieved despite carrying burdens he was only beginning to understand. After the interviews were complete, Margaret Foster gathered her materials with the efficiency of someone accustomed to disrupting lives. We'll need several days to review our findings and consult with the Oklahoma authorities. In the meantime, the children will remain here, but Ms. Chin should understand that this is a temporary arrangement pending our final determination. The threat was clear, even if it was couched in bureaucratic language. Sarah's face had gone pale again, and Benjamin could see her struggling not to break down in front of the officials who held her family's future in their hands. After the convoy of official vehicles departed, leaving dust clouds hanging in the evening air, Benjamin found Sarah in the kitchen, staring out the window at the pastures where her daughters were playing with Napoleon, their laughter carrying on the breeze. She looked fragile and defeated, all the strength that had sustained her through weeks of uncertainty finally exhausted. "They're going to take them," she said quietly, not turning from the window. "Marcus has money, connections, stability. I have nothing to offer except love, and apparently that's not enough." Benjamin moved to stand beside her, following her gaze to where the quadruplets were engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve Napoleon as the central character. "Tell me about Marcus," he said gently. "Help me understand what we're really dealing with." Sarah was quiet for so long that Benjamin thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a pain that went deeper than the current crisis. "Marcus is David's older brother. He never married, never had children of his own. He's successful, owns a construction company, has political connections, lives in a big house that's always perfectly clean, because he never really lives in it." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "When David died, Marcus started showing up more often, bringing expensive gifts for the girls, taking them on outings to places I couldn't afford." Benjamin began to see the shape of what had driven Sarah from Oklahoma. He was undermining you. He made it seem like kindness, like he was just trying to help his brother's family. But every gift came with a comparison to what I couldn't provide. Every outing highlighted the limitations of our life. He'd take the girls to fancy restaurants and then mention how nice it would be if they could eat like that every day. He'd buy them expensive clothes and then comment on how quickly they were outgrowing everything I could afford. The picture was becoming clearer, and Benjamin's anger toward Marcus Chen was growing. When did it become more direct? About 3 months after David died, Marcus started suggesting that maybe the girls would be better off with him. He had more resources, more stability, more opportunities to offer them. He could give them private school educations, piano lessons, dance classes, trips to Europe when they were older. Sarah's voice broke slightly. "All the things a mother wants for her children and can't provide. But they're not his children," Benjamin said firmly. "They're yours." That's what I told him, but Marcus is very persuasive and very patient. He started talking about how difficult it must be for me, trying to raise 4 children alone, how exhausting, how overwhelming, how ultimately unfair to the girls. He made it sound like love meant letting them go to someone who could give them more. Benjamin could see how insidious Marcus's campaign had been, how he had used Sarah's love for her children and her fears about her ability to provide for them as weapons against her. "When did you realize what he was really doing?" "When I found out he had been talking to a lawyer about filing for custody. A neighbor told me she had seen him meeting with someone from Child Protective Services, asking questions about our living situation, my financial status, my ability to cope with 4 children. Sarah turned from the window to face Benjamin, her eyes filled with pain and determination. "That's when I knew we had to leave. I couldn't fight him in Oklahoma, not with his connections and his money and his ability to make himself look like the reasonable choice." The magnitude of what Sarah had sacrificed to protect her children hit Benjamin with full force. She had given up her job, her home, her entire support system to keep her family together. The journey in the hay cart, the weeks of uncertainty, the desperate arrival at his ranch, All of it had been motivated by a mother's fierce love and determination to protect her children from being separated from her. "Sarah," he said gently, "why didn't you tell me all this when you first arrived?" She gave him a sad smile. "Would you have believed me? A strange woman showing up with 4 children, claiming she was running from her brother-in-law who wanted to take custody. Or would you have thought I was an unstable mother making up stories to justify kidnapping my own children?" Benjamin realized she was right. Without context, without understanding, her story would have sounded exactly like what the investigators had suggested, the desperate fabrications of someone trying to justify irresponsible behavior. "But now you know me," Sarah continued. "You've seen how the girls and I interact, how we function as a family. You know I'm not the unstable, unfit mother Marcus has painted me to be. I know you're an incredible mother who has made enormous sacrifices to protect her children," Benjamin said firmly. "And I'm not going to let them take your family away from you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of gratitude rather than despair. "Benjamin, you don't understand what you're saying. Fighting this could affect your ranch, your reputation, your entire life. Marcus has resources and connections that go far beyond Oklahoma. If you oppose him, he'll find ways to retaliate." "Let him try," Benjamin said, surprised by the fierce protectiveness he felt toward this family that had become so important to him in such a short time. "This is Texas, not Oklahoma. He doesn't have the same power here, and he's dealing with people who don't intimidate easily." Through the window, they could see the quadruplets running toward the house, their faces bright with excitement from their play session with Napoleon. In a few minutes, they would burst through the door expecting dinner, homework help, bedtime stories, and all the normal routines of children who felt safe and loved. The thought of those routines being disrupted, of these children being separated from their mother and placed with a man who saw them as possessions rather than people, filled Benjamin with a cold fury. "We need help," he said, his mind already working through possibilities. "Legal help, and probably political help too. Do you have any documentation of Marcus's behavior? Anything that would support your version of events?" Sarah shook her head. "He was too smart for that. Everything he did was technically legal and could be presented as concern for the children's welfare. The meetings with lawyers and social workers, the expensive gifts, the offers to help, it all looks like the actions of a caring uncle." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. What about David? What would he have wanted for the girls? David loved them completely. He used to say they were the best thing that ever happened to him, that adopting them was the smartest decision he ever made. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she talked about her deceased husband. He and Marcus had a complicated relationship. David always felt like Marcus saw him as the lesser brother, the one who wasn't successful enough, smart enough, ambitious enough. Marcus never approved of David's choice to adopt 4 children instead of having biological children of his own. This revelation provided another piece of the puzzle. Marcus's pursuit of custody wasn't just about the children. It was about proving his superiority over his deceased brother, about claiming David's most precious possessions as his own. Would David have wanted Marcus to raise his daughters? Benjamin asked. "Never," Sarah said without hesitation. David used to joke about how Marcus treated children like expensive pets, amusing to play with occasionally, but ultimately just accessories to display his success. David would be horrified to know Marcus was trying to take the girls away from me. The front door burst open, and the quadruplets tumbled into the house in a whirlwind of energy and excitement. Their faces were flushed from running, their clothes slightly disheveled from their adventures, and their eyes bright with the kind of happiness that came from feeling completely safe and free. "Mama! Mr. Benjamin!" Hope called out, rushing toward them with her arms full of interesting rocks she had discovered. "Look what I found by the creek!" Emma followed more sedately, but her excitement was equally evident. "We saw a family of deer drinking at the pond, and Napoleon chased away a snake that was bothering the chickens." Grace and Faith approached together, as they often did, Grace carrying a wildflower she had picked for her mother, while Faith clutched a sketch she had made of the horses in the pasture. Benjamin watched Sarah receive their offerings with the kind of attention and appreciation that made each small gift seem precious. This was what Marcus Chen wanted to destroy. Not just a living arrangement or a legal status, but the fundamental bond between a mother and her children, the daily interactions that created security and love and belonging. As the evening progressed through its familiar rhythms, dinner preparation, homework assistance, bath time, and bedtime stories, Benjamin found himself paying closer attention to the dynamics of this family he had come to care about so deeply. The quadruplets' easy affection with their mother, their complete trust in her judgment, their obvious happiness and security despite all the upheaval they had experienced, painted a picture that contradicted every accusation Marcus Chen and his investigators had made. After the children were settled for the night, Benjamin found Sarah on the front porch, staring up at the star-filled sky with an expression of profound sadness. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm thinking about how quickly everything can change," she replied softly. "This morning we had a routine, a sense of belonging, hope for the future. Tonight, I don't know if we'll still be together next week." Benjamin reached over and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "We'll fight this, Sarah. We'll find a way to keep your family together." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the moonlight. "Why? Why are you willing to risk everything for people you barely know?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the current crisis. Benjamin found himself confronting feelings he had been avoiding, emotions that had been growing stronger every day since Sarah and her daughters had arrived at his ranch. "Because," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "in 3 weeks, you've made this place feel more like home than it has in years. Because your daughters have brought life and joy to spaces that were just empty rooms. Because watching you with them has shown me what real strength looks like, what unconditional love actually means." He paused, looking out at the ranch that had been his refuge for so many years, realizing how different it looked now that it was filled with people who mattered to him. "And because I'm falling in love with all of you," he admitted quietly, "with the sound of children's laughter in my house, with the way you hum while you work, with the way Emma organizes everything she touches, and Grace finds beauty in simple things, and Hope discovers magic in everyday moments, and Faith sees the world through artists' eyes." Sarah's breath caught, and Benjamin could see tears glistening in her eyes. "Benjamin, I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know you're dealing with more than anyone should have to handle, and the last thing you need is additional pressure. But I needed you to know that this isn't just about helping a family in need anymore. This is about protecting people I love." The word hung between them, simple and profound, changing everything and nothing all at once. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Benjamin worried that he had overstepped, that his confession had added stress to an already overwhelming situation. "I love you too," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love the way you've welcomed us into your life, the way you treat my daughters like they're precious, the way you've given us not just shelter but belonging. I love your gentleness with the children and your strength when we need protection. I love the man you are and the father you've become to 4 little girls who desperately needed one." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, both understanding that they had crossed a threshold that would change everything about their relationship and their future. The crisis with Marcus Chen had forced them to confront feelings they might have approached more cautiously under normal circumstances. But the threat to their newly formed family had stripped away the luxury of taking things slowly. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked eventually. "Now we fight," Benjamin replied firmly. "We find the best lawyers money can buy, we document everything about the children's life here, and we show the world what a real family looks like." In the distance, Napoleon let out a soft crow, as if adding his agreement to Benjamin's declaration. Inside the house, 4 little girls slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. And on the front porch, 2 adults who had found unexpected love in the middle of crisis began planning a battle for the future of their family. The next morning brought new challenges and new hope in equal measure. Benjamin had spent much of the night researching family law attorneys and making phone calls to contacts throughout Texas who might be able to provide assistance or advice. By dawn, he had appointments scheduled with 2 of the state's most respected child custody lawyers and had reached out to local political figures who owed him favors from years of community involvement. Sarah had approached the morning with renewed determination, her despair of the previous evening replaced by the fierce protectiveness that had driven her to flee Oklahoma in the first place. She spent the early hours documenting every aspect of the children's life at the ranch, their educational progress, their health and happiness, their integration into ranch life, and the stability and security they had found in their new home. The quadruplets sensed the tension in the air but responded with the resilience that had carried them through months of uncertainty. They went about their morning routines with extra good behavior, as if intuiting that their best behavior might somehow help with whatever adult crisis was brewing around them. As Benjamin prepared to leave for his meeting with the first attorney, Emma approached him with her characteristic directness. "Mr. Benjamin," she said seriously, "are those people going to try to take us away from Mama?" Benjamin knelt down to her level, meeting her intelligent eyes with complete honesty. "They might try, Emma, but I want you to know that your Mama and I are going to do everything we can to keep that from happening." Emma considered this information with the gravity she brought to all important matters. "Will you still be our dad if we have to go away?" The question hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Somewhere in the past weeks, without formal declarations or legal documents, he had indeed become a father to these 4 little girls. They had accepted him into their lives with the generous hearts of children, and he had embraced the role with a completeness that surprised him. "I will always be your dad," he promised, pulling Emma into a hug that seemed to seal the commitment. "No matter what happens, no matter where you are, you will always be my daughters." Emma hugged him back fiercely, and Benjamin could see hope, grace, and faith hovering nearby, all of them needing the same reassurance he had just given their sister. "All of you," he said, opening his arms to include them all. "You're my girls, and nothing will ever change that." As he held all 4 children, feeling their small arms wrapped around him and their complete trust in his promise, Benjamin understood that the stakes of this battle went far beyond legal custody or living arrangements. This was about preserving the bonds that had formed so naturally and completely, about protecting the family they had all chosen to become. 6 months later, the Texas courthouse steps gleamed in the autumn sunlight as Benjamin emerged with Sarah and the quadruplets, their victory finally complete. The judge had ruled decisively in Sarah's favor, determining that Marcus Chen's claims were unfounded and motivated by control rather than genuine concern for the children's welfare. The girls clutched their mother's hands, their faces bright with relief and joy. "We're really staying forever?" Faith asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Forever and always," Sarah confirmed, pulling her daughters close. Benjamin watched his family celebrate, his heart full with a contentment he'd never imagined possible. The legal battle had been fierce, but it had also strengthened their bonds and proven what they all knew: they belonged together. Back at Riverside Ranch, Napoleon strutted proudly in the yard, as if he too understood the significance of their victory. The old rooster had become something of a family mascot, his morning crows now a welcome sound that marked the beginning of each perfect day. That evening, as golden light painted the pastures, Benjamin knelt in the living room where it all began. "Sarah Chen," he said, producing a simple ring, "will you marry me and make this family complete?" The quadruplets cheered before Sarah could even answer, their excitement bubbling over as they realized their favorite person was going to become their real father officially. "Yes," Sarah whispered through happy tears. 1,000 times yes. 2 months later, under the same oak tree where they'd first shared breakfast, Benjamin and Sarah exchanged vows while Emma, Grace, Hope, and Faith served as flower girls, their laughter mixing with Napoleon's proud crowing. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends who had become family and a ranch that had become home, Benjamin marveled at how a desperate arrival in a hay cart had transformed into the greatest blessing of his life. The quadruplets ran through the grass, catching fireflies and making wishes, their joy a testament to the power of love, determination, and the courage to fight for what matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.